Welcome to part 2 of today's conference, Focus Sweden. And I have a great pleasure to introduce you to our three forskare, senior lecturers from Stockholm University, Rebecki Brinch, Anny Lund och Ylvy Lornetzon. Who will be talking about staging migration for young audiences. And the lecture is in English and can be translated, or is translated to Polish. So if you need translation, please just let us know. Welcome once again.
Thank you.
There will be some time, I guess, for questions, like in the end. So please welcome as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Shall I start?
Yes.
Yes, please do.
So first of all, we're so happy to be here. We're very, very happy and honored to be invited to this event. And Warsaw has turned out to be such a fantastic city. We really enjoyed our days here. So me and my colleagues, we've been working with a project on staging migration for a couple of years now. And today is about that project, mainly. But we also want to introduce theater in Sweden for young audiences, but from a research perspective. So how we've conducted research around this topic and area for quite a few years in Sweden. So this presentation, we begin with introducing theater for young audiences in Sweden, and say something about the Swedish context right now of the current state of affairs, basically. And then we go on to speak a bit about what we do in the project, like overall. And then we have a particular example from the project that we want to introduce to you, which is why we have this particular title for the presentation. It's another title in the program for today, and that's, I just want to comment on if anyone was a little bit confused. So this is a title of a text we've written, and it came maybe just a month ago, so it's really very recent.
And it's a quote from one of our young persons that we interviewed,
Yes.
that have been in the audience as a member, thinking about what theater means for her, and especially theater that is staging her life experiences of having experiences of migration.
Yes. And then we, after that part of the presentation, we move into another project that we have, that we're currently involved in, that's based on this project. So it's basically 3 parts, this presentation. Yeah? So, on to the first slide. And I give the word to Rebecca.
So a little bit about Swedish children's theatre from a researcher's perspective, just as Ylva said, and also the current affair in Sweden. So Swedish children's theatre has a long history dating back to the 1800s. And in Sweden, theatre for children and young audiences has historically been very close to pedagogical issues and to the schools. So tied to the schools in different ways. And after the post-war period, in the 40s and 50s in Sweden, there was a strong emphasis on promoting children's well-being and children's rights in Sweden, as in, I think, all over Europe after the Second World War too. And this led to significant changes in the Swedish theatre landscape for children and youth. And in the 60s and 70s, Unga Klara, that has been invited here, for example, was founded by Susanne Osten as kind of a part of this change in the theatre. And in Sweden, children and youth have been recognized as a specific target group in cultural policy since 1974, quite early on. And Swedish cultural institutions have politically been expected to adopt a children's perspective since 2007. So in Sweden, all the cultural policy also works very by promoting a child's right to theatre also. So the Swedish children's theatre scene often explores themes and issues usually considered taboo for children in many other countries. I would say that that is quite specific for Swedish children's theatre. For instance, they depict divorce from a child's perspective. They address questions about anorexia and portray the experience of growing up with an alcoholic or mentally ill parent, and also explore the issue of suicide among young people. And this is just some examples. And these are plays played for a child performance from the age of 7 and up. And previous research also demonstrates how children's theatre can illuminate non-traditional childhood experiences in this way, showcasing children who grow up and develop in ways that differ from the expected norm. By depicting such non-conventional growth, performing arts can challenge the typical childhood image and help make non-traditional childhood experience more visible. So that's things that I think the Swedish children's theatre actually do in their performances. Yeah, I think we can change the slide. So in the early 2000s, children's theatre in Sweden was mainly created by a blonde and blue-eyed middle class, and it did not often address important topics like racism and segregation. So this is even though Swedish legislation has supported interculturalism and diversity since the 70s, and we're talking the beginning of the 2000s. But however, after 2015, something happened. Then there has been a slow but positive change in the representation of these issues in Swedish performing arts, and particularly actually in children's and youth theatre. And this change reflects the evolving world and shifting interests of the young audiences. So the number of children worldwide on the run has doubled actually since 2010, reaching approximately 50 million children that are fleeing in one way or the other from war in different countries. And this increase is faster than that of adults, so there's more children on the run than adults. And in 2018, the Swedish Cultural Council noted that migration was a prominent theme in applications for performing arts funding in Sweden. So this was partly, I think, as a response to the significant rise in the number of asylum-seeking children in Sweden in 2015, and partly due to changes in Sweden's demographics. So Sweden's children's theatre is changing with its super diverse population, and this is happening both on and off stage, and it's happening as we talk. So today, about 27% of the Swedish population consists of residents with a foreign background. And Sweden is highly urbanized and strongly segregated today. The young people that we will be discussing today, who we interviewed about theatre, they live in high-rise housing projects, an area in Sweden known as the Million Housing Program. So this program has been heavily criticized, particularly for the outdoor spaces and their connection to the large scale of houses. And critics also point out that these areas are located far from the city center, which contributes to the segregation today. So in 2015, when Swedish children's theatre began portraying the theme migration, it sparked a lot of questions among the artists involved in the performances, and they actually took contact with us as researchers. Because they presented their shows about migration at schools and preschools. And at schools and preschools is where a significant amount of the young audiences experience theatre for the first time in Sweden. And given Sweden's diverse population and the influx of young refugees in 2015, it was important for these arts to consider how these young people, with their own experiences of migration and fleeing from their home countries, would react to the performances that they staged. The artists grappled with questions about what the theatres could portray or not, and what they should avoid to create meaningful and sensitive performances for the audiences. So what could they actually show about migration, and what could they not show? These were questions questions that they were really asking themselves, and also asking us as researchers. So this is when we decided, me, Anna, and Ylva, to apply for a research project on the theme staging migration to find answers to these questions. So we plan to approach the topic from 3 different angles: cultural policy, artistic performances, and also the perspectives of the young audiences. And that's where we will mainly be talking about today, the young audiences.
Yes. So we applied for funding and we got it in 2019. And it's a big project. We aimed for the stars, and we almost got all the funding that we applied for. So we have a big combination of methods in this project. So we combine case studies of performances, of productions, with studies of applications for financial support, for instance. But we also had this fantastic idea that we need to do a nationwide survey, because we know nothing of, there's so little statistics when it comes to theater. Maybe we can ask individual theaters on, like, how many productions did you play? How many performances did you, how big was the audience? But there's no central body that keeps track, sort of. So we wanted to do a nationwide survey, and we did. But today, then, we'll talk about the reception. So today, we speak mainly about the case studies. And we did case studies of 5 productions that staged migration, all of them produced after 2015. And 4 of them we could follow, like we could be there ethnographically. But one of the productions was significant for its staging of migration, because they were early, they were fast, but it was performed before we got funding. So we did a retrospective analysis and study of their work. So how did we choose? Choosing 5 productions in a, like, there were more productions staging migration, let's just say that. But, so how did we define migration then? We do a very broad definition, or we adhere to a very broad definition. We think, because migration, we realized around 2015, or shortly after 2015, it was a very, like, tight focus on the fleeing aspect, on abruptly leaving your home and fleeing conflict. But then quite fast, this turned into something else. It turned into questions of, how do you settle in a new home? What happens when you're a settler in a new home? And what happens for the 2nd generation, for the 3rd generation? How do these experiences, like, move between generations? So we define migration as something that can happen to you as a 1st generation migrant, but also something that moves between. So that means that our productions, some of them stage migration as flight, but some of them stage migration as an experience in a family or in a society that doesn't really want to let you in, possibly. And the purpose of this project is to produce theoretical and empirical knowledge about the potential of children's theater to stage an inclusive Sweden. So that's the big main question that ties everything together. So in studying these productions, now we've come quite a long way. We've done all our empirical work, and now we've started writing it up. And the theme of migration, we've realized, it can generate very different things in the audience. For instance, as Anna has written an article about, it can generate both civil and existential repair. It can actually repair experiences of being the one excluded from a society, from what the society defines as the us, like the main majority group. But Rebecca has also written about how specific performances can function as a kind of trauma drama. that can relate and portray specific traumas as conflicts, and how they can become something that connects us all somehow. And I have myself written, for instance, an article about how being forced to work with concepts like diversity, for instance, when theaters apply for funding, it can shift how we think about theater in the civil sphere, in this community that we share, when we're forced to engage with cultural policy concepts like diversity, for instance. But when we listen to the audience, it's also very clear that it ignites social critique. Seeing these performances, working with these themes and the questions of what happens like in the here and now when you're uprooted, but what happens after a few years, what happens after a few generations, it really ignites thoughts of justice and hope for a different society. But the main thing is that it ignites social critique and new thoughts about the situation that Sweden is currently in. And that is the empirical focus of today, based on a chapter that we just published. And Anna will take us through that in a little bit. But before, we should just comment on what type of empirical materials that we actually use in this text. Yes.
Yeah, so these are the two performances that we will be talking about today. It's first a performance called Tre streck in Swedish, Three Stripes in English, performed at Kulturhuset Stadsteatern in Stockholm. And then it's Jag är Betlehem David Isaac, I am Bethlehem David Isaac in English, performed in Gothenburg. And both these theaters are placed in stigmatized neighborhoods. So those are the two plays that we will be talking about. And I am Bethlehem David Isaac is based on Bethlehem David Isaac's autobiography. She's the daughter of David Isaac, a journalist that's prisoned in Eritrea since several years. And the play depicts her escape from Eritrea and her experience of growing up in Sweden without her father, focusing on the challenges of growing up in a new country, just all these issues that Ylva just talked about. So the feeling of not being welcomed in one way or the other. And it's an autobiography, so the play is really written from her book. And then based on stand-up comedy, the play Three Stripes with Melody Farshin tackles the identity crisis that can arise between motherland, fatherland, and the million housing area programs, as represented also by the three dashes of stripes in the title and Farshin's Adidas-inspired stage costume that you see on the picture here. So Farshin, she takes us on a journey through her parents' flight from the beginning from Iran to Sweden, and what it's like to grow up and live in this million program area, and the encounter with the majority Sweden. So Farshin, she depicts the challenges that can arise when you have to navigate between other people's expectations and your own dreams, to be in the middle of this. And while also having to deal with negative stereotypes about the million housing area programs. And this is really a theme which we will also talk about, especially in regard to the young audiences. And the majority of the examples we will discuss today comes from the perspective of young audiences aged between 15 to 19 years old. So that's the age of the audience. Yeah.
Yes. So before we get to the audience and their critique and their reactions to these plays, I'm just going to say something about what we use, like theoretically, what tools we use to think about these young people's experiences. So a few of these concepts we use several times in our other studies as well. But for this text in particular, we've used this combination. So first of all, recognition and recognition gaps. They're concepts that are developed by a French sociologist called Michelle Lamont. And she wants to point to that inequality is about more than just material inequality or different opportunities in a society. She points to the fact that, or she means that there's also unequal distribution of worth, in a sense. So we recognize different groups in a society as different in terms of legitimacy. So we ascribe the majority population a sense of worth, of being productive, of being promise, of being the solid foundation of our society. But marginalized groups most often realize this is a sense of worth that doesn't apply to them. So recognition gaps point to this division in how we ascribe or assign worth in a society. So the one who is deemed wanted, worthy, and capable is kept separate from the ones who are deemed the opposite, who are seen as the problem, who are seen as not really fitting in, as being on the margins and being problematic, being most often almost a threat to the majority population. So this creates severe boundaries within the civil sphere where we include some people and we question the inclusion of other people. And since we create meaning about other individuals in terms of difference, because when we include and when we exclude people, it shows how we ascribe difference and how we kind of tune into difference, how we perceive people to be different. And since we do this like sorting of the people around us, we can also use this process to analyze how symbolic boundaries are created between groups. Because the differences in recognition and in worth, assigned worth, creates boundaries. They're symbolic, yes, but they turn into social boundaries when they are also ascribed to certain individuals and identities who reside in certain places, most often, and who are identified as carrying certain traits or being carriers of certain behaviors and traits. So then, living in a very segregated country, as Sweden is, a society that is really divided, you can see that the issues of symbolic boundaries can create very severe gaps, recognition gaps between groups in our society. So the symbolic boundaries become social and very tangible, material boundaries in our cities, for instance. And building on this, we've also used a theorist called W.E.B. Du Bois, who was active almost 100 years before these other two. But they're on the same kind of track, we believe. Because Du Bois wrote about the experiences of Black Americans around 1900. And he described how the prolonged lack of recognition kind of creates a split sense of self for Black Americans, where you're forced to, when you can, almost every day, when you're constantly forced to deal with the outside look of the majority population, when you're inside this position, and you're forced to adhere to these rules, to the outside look upon who you are, your sense of self splits. So you're never completely whole. You can never just adhere to your own vision, your own gaze, your own experience. You're split in constantly seeing yourself from the outside, from the majority gaze, who is judging you, who is seeing you from a completely different perspective than maybe your own experience of self, of your community, of the place where you're grown up, of your belonging, basically. And this double, or this split, we think is very obvious and tangible also in our material. And in our theorization, we see how these things kind of work as a complex, a theoretical complex to understand the experiences of the young audience.
So now it's time to listen to the young audiences that we have had a great, fortunate work to encounter and to interview and have a conversation with. But in one way, just to make a very, very short summary of Rebecca and Ylva's presentations, you should envision a Swedish children's and youth theater today where people not only look like the three of us. And so there are differences today when you go to Swedish children's theater compared to maybe just 10 years ago when it comes to what kind of music are played, the tempo of the plays, different narratives and experiences, different bodies, and also different scenography and costumes. So it's a less white, bourgeois, westernized theater. So it has become more diverse. And two of those plays that we have followed, that Rebecca introduced, are the plays we have talked to young people about. And they are about becoming aware and seeing hope for another kind of Sweden, because Sweden have been a society that have prioritized or have been seeing that it has been a good way of building a society with welcoming people from all around the world. But that is not the truth anymore in Sweden. So Sweden has made a U-turn and is today a country where more people are actually leaving than coming to Sweden. So there's anti-immigrant sentiments in the policy and in the media coverage. And almost all social problems in Sweden when it comes to, you know, not being on top in the PISA, education, review, criminality, everything is like blamed on the other. And that is mostly people with migrant background living in stigmatized neighborhoods where the majority of the Swedish population have, or the white Swedish population have abandoned. But when we meet the young people that encounter these two plays, they are saying something about theater. Theater should be fiction. But when they encounter these plays, they say that these plays are much more about reality than the narrative they meet in the media. They think the media is fiction and theater plays about their experiences are the truth and are much more multidimensional. And these plays are also written and performed from within. So, for example, Three Stripes, about the narrative of being a child of parents that came as refugees, and is making this story about how it is to have an identity where you cannot really separate experiences that come from the parents' country, the motherland, the new country, Sweden, and the neighborhood, the Million Home programs, that is something that is brought together. And they see that as such much more multi-layered way of understanding their reality. And Melody Farshin, who wrote and performed this play, comes from this neighborhood herself. So she has what we call a relational capital. They believe in her because they know that she is part of the story of living in a neighborhood where the play is played. So it wouldn't be the same if I did it, because I don't carry those experiences, and I wouldn't be identified as an authentic voice in that setting.
And to interject, the same goes for the other play, I Am David Isak, because she, not her whole youth, but a part of her youth, she lived in Angered.
Yeah, exactly.
So they share that authenticity trait.
Yeah. So these are some narratives then from the young people we interviewed. I will read the quotes. One of the persons we call Isa is saying, if you are from the suburb, that is the stigmatized neighborhood, and are ashamed that you are from here, if you see this performance, that is Three Stripes, you can realize that there's a lot of positive things too. So that was one quote. And Iman is talking about hope of increased understanding when she is saying, I usually say that everyone should work in a service job. And in the same way, everyone should put themselves in a position to understand the other. I don't think people would ever be unpleasant to a waiter if they had worked as a waiter. And I don't think a person had made jokes about certain things or said stuff about some things if they have seen the performance. So hope of increased understanding and empathy among the majority population and majority audience to come and watch these plays or something the students or the young audience are hoping for. And Noor is saying, she is critical, she is also very realistic, saying, I don't think a stand-up comedy like Three Stripes will change the minds of Swedes. I think it's more larger stuff like Aftonbladet, that's a big evening tabloid in Sweden. The news, it's them who imprint the suburb, the theater is just a small piece of it. And I think also, of course, that's true. We need more stories. But I would say that today in Sweden, and maybe in many different countries, we need other stories. And theater and art have the possibility and the symbolic power to also present other stories than the media and the politics are doing. So the students we have met are really, or this audience we met are really talking about that. So you can change perhaps. There's some...
Did it not? No? No.
Yeah, here we have. Yeah. So here are some analytical points then, that the negative political media fiction surrounding stigmatized neighborhoods is nuanced, according to the audience who have seen the plays. And what is then the negative political media fiction? It's often about criminality, organized crime, and about a belief that the people that are living in these neighborhoods want to self-segregate. And if there's one thing that our interviews with young people are saying is that that is totally wrong. They're really longing for being seen as part of society overall. And it's also an interesting thing because often when you are a qualitative researcher or an ethnographer, you need to talk to young people. And young people are in schools. And sometimes when you knock on the door to schools or send an email to a headmaster or a teacher, well, they say, no, we're so busy. You can't have time from our students because you need to study to the national test in mathematics or whatever. But one thing struck us when we were contacting the headmaster and the teachers for students going to schools in the stigmatized neighborhoods is that nobody turned us down. And that was a bit surprising. And one of the teachers actually said, Anna, why I said yes to you is because you want to talk about theater with our children. And she continued and said, most people that call me or send me an email want to talk about crime and racism and so on. So they of course, it also says something about what is expected of these children to know something about. And theater it seems not to be one of those things, according to the teachers that we met.
And also some of the, we had an experience with the headmaster, or no, it was a teacher actually, who said, yes, you're so welcome, please come. But if you're to come and interview my students, I also want you to give a 1-hour presentation about what it means to be a researcher.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really nice that she just like, well, yes, you're invited, but there's also some work to be done on your on your end.
Yeah. And then the symbolic power to create new narratives, and those new narratives are both for oneself as an audience member, that some of them say we start to believe ourselves that we are worse than everyone else, because that is what we hear all the time. But also they want new narratives, a more nuanced narrative for the white majority population. So the narratives are both for themselves, but also for the white majority audience. And then there's a form of shame reduction, to feel like, okay, we can laugh about things that we share. We may come from different countries, but we live in the same neighborhood. We all have more or less parents. Most of the people, the young people who saw Three Stripes, and also they are parents. They are children of parents who came as refugees, for example. So they are Swedish kids, but they are not treated as Swedish kids by the society. So they also felt a kind of shame reduction in encountering this together with other people in the audience, in the room, in the theater room. And one girl actually said to me that was the first time that she could feel that she didn't have this double consciousness that Ylva explained to us. She didn't feel that she had the gaze from the white majority society on her when she was in the audience group with the other in the audience. That she felt whole in being there and seeing an artistically interpreted stage performance of the kind of experiences she is sharing with the other people in the audience. And a very strong feeling then of not being alone. And you can actually, as I said, laugh about things that you never really laugh about when it comes to your experiences in a sense. And then there's a kind of fictional monster that you're carrying that also is being destroyed. So there's something that is happening in the encounter with the staging performance. You can maybe share. Yes. Here are some other interviews. Sara is telling us a story that is quite sad. It was actually the case that one of our stages, one of the theaters that we made research about, is called Stadsteatern, the city theater in this neighborhood, Husby. And it was a new theater stage. So it had just recently opened as a way of working with integration questions in Stockholm, because they saw that the people living there are not coming into the city center to watch on the big stages. So they moved one stage out to this neighborhood called Husby that is stigmatized. And some of the young audience members we talked with, they thought that this must be wrong. They must have done a mistake. It felt out of place to have a theater here where we live. And Sara is actually saying, now there's another thing that is going to disappear, peter out, because so much of it does in our neighborhoods. Because almost everything that has opened up has shut down, opened up and been shut down. So what the children and the youth is also pointing to is a kind of project culture, that, okay, good things are coming for half a year and then it disappears. So they don't believe in continuity, and this is something that the municipality, the city will actually continue to fund. So they don't really have this trust in the culture policy of Stockholm in this case. And Iman is clarifying this also, that she's saying you grow up thinking that we are inferior and just that our neighborhoods are dirtier and that is really unclean. So there's a kind of almost self-hatred being socialized that they also became aware of in our theater talks with them. And that they are growing up in the shadow of quality. I'm not sure if we have data on that. Yes, maybe. But there's a feeling that if the good theater is probably not here. It's probably needed to go to the city center or something. That we probably get like some kind of second sorted piece of theater at our place. I think we could change. So why then is it important with theater in the neighborhoods that we have been visiting and been research both theater and the place? Iman is saying there's a possibility to create a stage for oneself and success for oneself among one's own people. And that is quite interesting. They often talk about their neighbors as our people. It doesn't matter if a person is from another ethnic background. This is still my people because we are still brought up together. We have the same experiences and we create our own culture because we have a culture from motherland, the homeland like Sweden, and the Million Homes program. So we still have a similar upbringing. So there's this high-rise housing area that becomes also a very important part of their identity work in these areas. And they also want the possibility to be creative from within, to be able to explore this field of artistic work where they're actually living. And one of the theater professionals that we interviewed, that have a migrant background herself, she also said that why theater is needed in these neighborhoods is that what is often expected of these children is to play soccer or to do hip-hop. So they are like two different cultural phenomena. And to have a theater stage is opening up different kinds of possibilities, both when it comes to dance and to theater, poetry, and so on. And Farid is saying, I think that so long as such a place, a theater is in a suburb, it can open up a lot of avenues for children and youth. So here we have both like the leisure and the career opportunities. But it's also this sad last quote that is actually about the possibility of feeling safe. So Farah is illuminating that for us when she is saying that the importance of theater is imagine someone who is really interested in theater but doesn't dare to go, who lives here but doesn't dare to go into town because people can get looks or stares. So of course it is easier if the theater can be here and come here to Husby, because then anyway she is at home. So there's also this fear of actually traveling in the city, and that is one of the things that young people have shared with us, that most discrimination and microaggression, that people look at you in a disturbing way, is on public transportation. And many of the girls with hijab that we've interviewed say that they really think about where they are standing on the platform when they go in the subway, because they are afraid that someone will push them or grab their hijab and so on. So they always stand really close to the wall to feel safe. I think we can take the last in mind, I think. Yeah, so what is this all about then? These stories is both about being empowered from within, and also that theater, maybe we forget about that, all of us in this room working or studying theater. The theater is actually highbrow art that has a kind of legitimate aura, dimension over it, and to actually put that kind of institution in a neighborhood that has very low status is a way of also recognizing the people living there as also part of the city and part of that kind of highbrow culture and of kind of recognition. And both then it's a source of inspiration and also the possibility to enter into creative processes, to feel this safety, and that the narratives of minorities in stigmatized neighborhoods need to reach also majority groups. And that is another interview pattern we've seen, that we also think that it shouldn't only be that the white majority Swedes should come to stigmatized neighborhoods. This theater about being a person with migrant background needs also to be played on the big stages. It shouldn't only be here. It should be everywhere, because that is how Sweden looks today. So then it's also about theater as recognition, as a kind of existential repair, the feeling of not being torn apart, but having this sense of being whole and being recognized. And in a world in Sweden today that is very much, unfortunately, characterized by the presence of ethno-racial stigmatization of groups with migrant background.
Mm-hmm. So one could also say that another theme in our interviews and that we would like to illuminate is really theater also as the importance of where theater is staged, not only on what is staged on the stage, but also on where. So the theater performances discussed today can be described as place-based theater in many ways. I think it does something to perform something in the neighborhood. You're telling a story that is actually based from the neighborhood where you are telling the story. It's also important that the audience, I mean the ones not living in the Million Program area, has to travel to that place to see the theater, to actually be in the place also. So that's an important thing. It's really a kind of materialized feeling.
Sorry, Rebecca, but I think the interesting thing about that is that it turned out to be significant for the whole audience. It's not just significant for these kids, it's also significant for the kids from the white city center, who all of a sudden have been to Husby for the first time, or they just, in their stories of the day that we went to the theater, we all, I mean, sometimes we speak about like the bus being the important thing, like the bus ride to the theater. But in this case, it's really, really true, because moving to parts of your city where you have never been experiencing these stories was really significant for all of them. They all experienced something particular about that movement.
So, for example, some of them really felt seen, as Anna said, and recognized. For others, it was kind of a way to really become aware of your own privileges that you actually have, but you don't think about in daily life. So that's what happened. And of course, something happens also when you're sitting in an audience together and also having theater talks with us after seeing the performances in these divided groups and starting to talk to each other maybe for the first time about how it is to live in one area of the city or another area of the city and not being able to speak about it or to meet. So something really happened, not only when you were seeing the performances, but also in the talks after the performances. And we actually had a teacher who phoned to us after we had done one of these audience talks. And she said she had promised the 3 young girls that I had talked to really contact me and say that they felt that they were seen for the first time and heard. And that was really important for them. So something is really happening. There's this kind of power that I think theater actually has to move us and to divide these gaps that Ylva was talking about. And it's important. Place is important. Both what is the imagined place, but also where you actually experience it, I think. Yeah.
And I can just add one empirical example, adding to what Rebecca was telling us. I made an interview with a young white man who has just left high school and started his first work. And he was struggling with learning a very difficult for a Swede, a Persian name, and he had given up after a couple of times. And then he saw 3 stripes and told me that he was starting to think, I think his actual quote was that I'm actually sitting here on, I have power, I have privilege, and he would go back to his workplace and try again to learn this name. So that had very concrete effects for this person.
Oh, we've been here. Oh, I'm a bit confused now. The other way around. Yes.
Good.
Here we go. Yes. So we speak to a lot of people in this project. And as researchers, we're obligated to communicate research. And most often, researchers do that by writing articles and books for other researchers, mainly. Sometimes, some of us also want to write books for the general public, but honestly, most researchers focus on other researchers. And in relation to our informants, it became very obvious to us that our informants were probably the last group that researchers would even consider to try and communicate with. They're young, that's one problem, but they're also from stigmatized areas, most of them, and they're just completely out of the picture. So then in considering how do we give back, because so many people have engaged with our questions, they have given so much of their time, and they've shared their very personal, sometimes, experiences. So how do what do we do with all of this information now? Yes, we do our research publications, but more than that. And we started thinking about how we could try and find new ways to communicate our research. And one of our informants said after seeing 3 stripes also, that it was kind of that it was about kind of being Swedish and being yourself at the same time, that the show got him to think about him being both Swedish, but also wanting to be himself, and not being really true in any of those identity positions. And we applied for another project, but instead to communicate our research, which is titled Being Swedish and Being Yourself, Dramatized Research Communication as Democratization Work. Please read it, I can't speak anymore. So this project is also funded by the Swedish Research Council, and it builds on the project Staging Migration. So it's that research, the findings from that project, that we want to communicate in new ways. And we're aiming to enable access to target groups for genuine dialogue and real change. That's very ambitious. And we'll see if we get there. We really hope we do. So, of course, doing research on performing arts, we, of course, turn to artists to help us do this. Because researchers, we're good at our stuff, and theater people, you're good at other stuff, but you communicate just as much as we do. So we turn to artists, especially one artist that we will hear from today, Rebecki Brinch, who has great experience with working together with researchers in her work, to find ways to communicate our research to new audiences. So this is kind of the last bit of our presentation. That is then the move from staging migration in cooperation with drama queen and Rebecki Brinch. So we applied for this project to find new ways, not really knowing beforehand what those new ways were going to be. But we knew we wanted to work with Rebecki, for instance. And in this process that we that we worked out together, I would say. We started by meeting and sharing research of both finished and unfinished research output. We gave you our articles, our tentative ideas for articles, and you read it, and we met and we talked. We talked a lot. And we talked not only about the research output, like our findings and conclusions that we were measuring out and working with, but we also talked about how we did this, on our method, on the field work. For instance, we shared our interview guides, so you knew exactly what we were working with and how we were doing it. And Rebecca also got to read some of our empirical drafts, like transcripts from certain interviews. But then we also, like, in our talks, we realized that we share so much experiences, but you from the artistic side and we from the researcher side, and we ended up also wanting to discuss theoretical perspectives. So we did a joint theoretical reading. We read a few texts. We read a text by Bell Hooks, for instance, and we read a few texts from a cultural sociologist that we work with in the project called Jeffrey Alexander. So we read theoretical texts, and then we spent a lot of time talking about those, and then reverting back to our experiences of theater for young audiences. So we did a lot of reading and writing and talking and lots of coffee. And then Rebecca's process, like writing process, started, because we wanted to communicate to you what we were thinking, what our research had led us to. But then it was Rebecca's task to write something, and that was your, like, that was your end of this process. So you started writing, and we got to read this, the text as it developed. So we got to read your work and comment on your work, and you continued reading or writing, and we got to read it, and we commented, and one day Rebecca called us and said, "I'm finished." Full stop, it's done now. And we got to read it, and then came a process of production, really. So the output of this project so far in our collaboration is there's a finished dramatic text, but then you also did a recorded reading of this text that we'll get to see after the break, that you can both listen to as just audio, but you can also see it in an audiovisual, like on your computer, basically, from anywhere. And then to continue that work of joint reflection, we also did a podcast. So when the text was finished and the audio drama was recorded, the reading was done, we also had a shared conversation yet again, together with a professor in Sweden called Karin Helander, professor of theater studies. And after the podcast, now we're in like the end stages of this part of our project. So the next point after the podcast was Warsaw, I think. And maybe this is a good time to stop, take a break.
Yes.
I think we have
questions or
time
reflections.
for questions, if there are questions. Yes.
Because our translator is got a comment from the...
All right. Yes.
So I
Yes.
will run and...
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So if there are questions, we're happy to try and answer them, or reflections from your own work or perspectives.
Or experiences of similar dramas in your context where you are working, or
Yes.
This is About translators'
Good.
Strange situation. Proves the point that you need two of us to do a good job. So thanks for this interesting talk. I was obliged to listen it, and I felt happy to work with it. You were absolutely clear, but I just wanted to share my experience because I was reading some of your publications while preparing for this talk, and I was really struck how similar it is, these experiences between migrant people and people with disabilities are. It's amazing. I mean, at one point you were talking about gaze, about staring on public transportation. Do you know that in disability studies there is a book by Rosemary Garland Thompson which is called Gaze? It's all about this gaze that people stare at us. This comment in one of your papers about you know, how nice it is that you talk so fluent in Swedish. We get these comments all the time, every day. So it's absolutely amazing how similar these things are, and perhaps we could look for joint responses to these issues. Like my wife, who is also blind, she was absolutely amazed by this idea of stand-up and drama, and she has already started writing down some of our ideas for the stand-up comedy, because that's the only thing you can do actually with all these comments, these microaggressions, etc. That's the only thing you can do. You can laugh about it. Either you cry or laugh. So thank you very, very much. I really feel inspired by your talk, and I hope we can continue collaborating on that, because this is a major problem. Like the other day I was at a conference about work, and one of the researchers spoke to me, and she said, look, we have a really major issue with migrant populations. Like, workers do not accept these populations. What can we do about it? So I guess it's very, very good to kind of interact and learn from each other. What can we learn from each other, from all these stigmatized populations? I do believe in alliances, and once we have these alliances, I think we'll be able to change this world, if not a lot, then just a little, but it's still very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your engagement with our work.
Thank you for coming.
We want to reply.
No, but I really appreciate his listening and also the reading of our work. And we have also been discussing that there are great similarities when it comes to other groups that also are marginalized or stigmatized, to also expand our research and our possibilities to collect data in relation to that. So that would be something that would really be good. And also alliances, I really believe in that. And also the possibility to come here and to learn from each other. I really believe in mutual understanding and mutual learning.
But I also think it's, it has been, I mean, talking to these audience members in particular, it's sometimes not hopeful to take part of what the experience is from the margin is. But it is, however, hopeful to realize that, no, maybe we cannot change things around just, I mean, like Noor said, maybe it's not theater. It's the big stuff, like the tabloids and the media that's going to change how we think about each other and so on. But it's also evident that for the people who have encountered these stagings of migration, stuff has happened. It has changed how they think about each other and themselves. And
Yeah, I usually say that theater might not have the power to change the world, but we as an audience actually has the power. So we as an audience has to go out. The change is on us, I think. But theater can spark that will to change things. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh yes, there's a. You're getting a microphone, yeah.
Thanks for a very interesting talk. I was wondering, you were mentioning the media landscape and somewhat difficult political and media landscape. Would you see any positive signs of reclaiming the Million program, neighborhood program, and the maybe somewhat, anyway, increased presence of actors or coming through the theater or film, like as in contrast to like, or somehow in spite of the difficulties, maybe even
I would
increased
say yes.
efforts to do that, maybe on the part of the media as well.
I think especially in the area of Husby, which is outside of Stockholm, because there's a not thanks to the theater, but thanks in part to the theater being there. But it's a really strong civil society in that place, and they have a what's it called, Folkets hus,
like a community, big community building,
yes,
and community association
that have really like made big efforts to inspire and to create spaces for youth and the local community to be creative, to create podcasts or to create, if maybe just like for their neighbors, for the close society. But as time has gone by, they have kind of accumulated enough people and enough voices. So it is kind of, we have colleagues, research colleagues, Ove Sandhede and Sara Uno, who have written about it kind of growing a kind of a new cultural capital, particular of, like, specific to that area. So I think, yes, there are openings to kind of, well, at least push the media discourse a little bit.
And two other things that we're thinking about is also that there has been, both in Gothenburg and also in Stockholm, they also start actor training programs in collaboration so that young people from this area can be trained and have the possibility to also receive like professional skills of being on the stage themselves. But I would also say that some of my own hope at this moment comes from what I call local civil spheres, that there are pockets in these neighborhoods that are today keeping the old social democratic Sweden alive, and they are non-white. So they are carrying the institutional collective memory of how Sweden once was. And my hope is that these local civil spheres one day will be where we can find what Sweden actually should be again. So, and they are not, they have given, maybe I'm a little bit exaggerating now, but they have given up the hope of being included in whole Sweden. So then they have these local civil spheres as a way of creating energy.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.